All right, g'day everyone, and welcome to another edition of Malts with Mates, where we have a fantastic guest from the whiskey industry on every Tuesday and Friday to chat about their distillery. My guest today is Patty Fletcher, co-founder of the Port of Leith Distillery in Edinburgh. Patty, how you doing today, mate?
Really, really good, thanks. We have had a fantastic week, and I am absolutely stoked for this interview. So let's go.
Nice one. So first things first, what are you drinking today?
I have a slight confession to make. Unfortunately, my wife gave birth to a little baby son 4 weeks ago, and so I've kind of been on a slight booze hiatus for a couple of weeks. And unfortunately, my whiskey stocks were perilously low before then, and so I'm quite running a little dry in the house at the moment. The last bottle we had in the house was a fantastic Glenfarclas 15-year-old, which was lovely. I can't collect. I don't know how people collect. I buy whiskey and then I drink it very quickly. So if a bottle arrives, it disappears. There's a one in, one out.
I'm in the same boat as you, but speaking of that Glenfarclas 15, the bottle and box for that are actually what my camera is taped to film this, because it's an incredibly impressive setup of.
Brilliant.
But
I love it.
I don't know if people in the industry or the community would know you. Could you tell us a bit about yourself, how you started loving whiskey, and what you did before your current position?
Yeah, of course. So my business partner Ian and I, we are very kind of co-foundry in this. It's a 100% 50-50 split. We're all friends from Edinburgh, so we grew up together. We went to the same school together. I've known him since I was 5, and we ended up living in London in the kind of late 2000s, 2005, 2006, and we had crappy jobs. I was training to be an accountant, and Ian was working in the wine industry. He was working for Majestic Wine, and then he moved on to work for a more premium wholesaler called Robeson. And we were living and drinking a lot of whiskey, and we were kind of throwing around a few ideas about what we wanted to do with our lives, which involved leaving London and getting back to Edinburgh, and maybe thinking about starting a business. And I then left accounting practice and ended up working for a bunch of tech startups. So companies like Halo, Y-Plan, and then finally WeWork. And these companies were very interesting for someone like me. As an accountant, I wasn't really exposed to the idea that you just start a company, and your job was to work for big companies. Big companies was where it was at. And I thought, the closest I would get to working for the whiskey industry was to go work for Diageo. That would be the dream. What I realized from working for these startups was that the guys who run them are idiots. They don't really know what they're doing. And the best the best skill is just talking to investors and and raising millions and millions of dollars, and then literally throwing it against a wall until something stuck. And none of the companies I worked for eventually ever succeeded. But what I took from those experiences was that if you've got a good idea and you really nail down your business model, then people will invest and you will find it. And I was convinced that we would be better managers of our money than other people would be. So we got going back in 2014. That was when we launched the company officially. I can't remember why we did that. I think we had a bill to pay and I wanted to recover the VAT. So I was like, right, everything stops until I get my VAT number, and then we go from there. So that was the sort of the early incarnation of the business. The next step really was when we stood back and said, well, if we want to be in the whiskey industry, what does that mean? And we kind of came at it from several angles at once, and they all kind of met in the middle, which was starting a whiskey distillery is a difficult business model because your cash flows in the early years are really bad. You haven't got anything to sell. You've got a minimum of 3 years where you can sell scotch. you've got probably a lot longer until you've got something that the average whiskey fan's going to want to drink. They've been inured over the last 100 years that a higher number on the front of the bottle is a better number. 12 is better than 8, 15 is better than 12, and 30 is better than 15, and go on from there. And that for a new distillery, if you've only got 2-3 years under your belt, is difficult. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is that a lot of the trade has been about tradition and heritage and legacy and these massive brands that are slightly daunting, like Callan and Glenfiddich and so on, and they're the ones that people have heard of, and you try and you rock up with your new bottle and you say, hey, I'm the new whiskey distillery, and they're like, well, why would I want to buy a new whiskey? And we said, well, what we can do here actually is split this around, and go all Sun Tzu on it and say, well, if our biggest weakness is that we're new, why don't we engage with that and just be new? And there were a lot of new distilleries that were popping up at the time in Scotland. Were quite, they would try and put themselves in an old barn, or they would refurbish an old building, and you end up with this slight mismatch between, I'm a new distillery, but I'm in an old building. And we're like, that's kind of cool, because there's a whole Brooklyn, Shoreditch, red brick walls. We'll repurpose that old linen warehouse and we'll put a still in the corner and we'll make some craft bourbon. That's kind of cool. But we didn't really think that the problem is that the scale that a whiskey distillery needs to operate at doesn't really work for that. You can't just repurpose an old red brick warehouse and run with it. So we said, why don't we just try and do this completely new? Build a brand new building, make that the focus, be new and be unashamedly new. And by doing so, hopefully attract tourists who'll come along and help out with our early year cash flow problem. Because if we're going to sell, we can sell tours. And whiskey tourism has been one of the biggest boom industries in Scotland for the last 5 years. I remember we had a statistic from Visit Britain at the very, very start of this process that was the most requested things people wanted to do in Scotland were play golf, and the second was visit a whiskey distillery. And we're like, if that's the second most requested thing to do in Scotland, and yet most people who come to Scotland aren't even coming to the Highlands, they're going to Edinburgh or Glasgow, but mostly Edinburgh. Edinburgh gets a huge number of the tourists. And lots of them don't really leave Edinburgh. Then why don't we just build it in Edinburgh? And that solves all of our problems. We get to move back to Edinburgh. We get to build a whiskey distillery. We can persuade investors that the cash flow thing is all taken off. And hey, how hard can this be, right? And so that was our idea 6 years ago.
So 6 years to the day, and this is, you're laying the groundwork for the Port of Leith Distillery. As you said, you're one of the newest Scottish distilleries. What has gone and what does go into building your distillery?
The first thing that we needed was to find the land. So we find a site, and we went on a lot of sites. And at the time we had, various ideas of what that meant. And I think the original budget that we had in mind was like 3.5 million. Okay, that's what it's going to cost. And that was going to be a small distillery, like a big shed, and we'll rent a bit of land down in Leith. And at the time, Leith had a lot of spare land. It hadn't really recovered from the recession of 2008, 9, 10. There was a lot of brownfield land lying about. In the early 90s, mid 90s, they cleared all of the old warehousing away, which was a crying shame. But they got rid of everything and they started to rebuild. And then they kind of paused. They got bored, and then they just left everything for 20 years to rot. And that left these great opportunities. We said, this would be easy, right? And of course, it wasn't easy. We really struggled to find anything that we could get our hands on. And we struggled to even just to get people to talk to us, because we had no money, we had no investors. We had a spreadsheet that I kind of cobbled together on a train once, and it kind of spat out a number, and we said, well, here's our dream. And finding the land was the tricky part, and we went through various false starts about talking to various institutions in Edinburgh who own land and said no to us. And we're about to buy a bit of land from Fourth Ports, and then that was yanked because it was sold to a house builder, and that happened several times. We were looking at a bit of land council was selling, that was sold to a house builder. We were looking at a bit of land out by the airport that was sold to a house builder. House builders buy land, and people like them because they have covenant and they have cash. And we had neither cash nor covenant, so we were kind of always, left to the side. And then someone introduced us to Ocean Terminal. If you don't know Edinburgh too well, Ocean Terminal is a big shopping mall that was probably the only proper bit of development done in the old shipyards back in the late 90s. And it was supposed to be part of this big redevelopment of the area, and we saw some beautiful visuals of all of this like built up area. And it was event, 20 years later, it's still on its own, and only finally now are they building a few houses around. And we said, well, no, we haven't talked to Ocean Terminal. And someone said, no, you should talk to them. We said, no, we don't want to talk to Ocean Terminal. Why not? Well, they're a shopping center. We don't want to build a distillery in a shopping center. That would be weird. And people said, this guy said, no, you don't understand. They own land. Okay, just go and talk to them. And so we met this guy, Dennis, who was their center manager. He's a really nice American from Kansas. And he'd been running this thing for 20 years. 20 years now, then it was 18 years. And he said, okay, this is interesting. Why don't you go and talk to my real boss, who's based in London, and he's the private equity shop that owns the center. So we told off to go and meet this man, Subject. And Subject said, okay, I'm interested in this concept because what we're looking for is things that will bring footfall to the site. Ocean Terminal struggles for footfall. If you build a distillery on a tiny scrap of land they have next door to it, then we can get more footfall for the shopping center, and then we're happy. So we said, brilliant, Subject. Can we get you a drink? Can we buy a bottle of whiskey? He said, no, I don't drink. So okay. So the one thing Ocean Terminal does have, which is so vital for us, is that moored just next to it in the harbour is the Royal Yacht Britannia. And the Britannia is fantastic attraction. It's Scotland's highest rated tourist attraction. It's, 500,000 visitors a year. It is a brilliantly run institution. It knows exactly how to make tourism happen. It brings people down on buses. It's recently just built a 5-star floating hotel around the corner. It's very invested in Leith. It's brilliant. And all we have to do is build a building next to it, write the word whiskey down the side, and we're like, hey, how far can we go wrong? People will turn up at the boat, have a nice morning, and then someone will say, what should we do this afternoon, dear? And the other side of that equation will say, well, look, there's a building that says whiskey on it. Let's go in there. And so that's our sales pitch done. So we spend a lot of time negotiating with Ocean Terminal to buy this little bit of land, and we finally got that done, and that took a long time. And in the meantime, we finally, after various false starts, various investors, had found, because we tried at the start to raise all the money. Like, right, let's go and raise 5 million. No, hang on, the budget's gone up to 8. Oh my God, the budget's gone up to 10. And it, kept rising as I kept having problems with my figures. And eventually the numbers sort of settled down, and we met up with a few sort of angel investors, and we said, right, you guys invest now, and you fund the planning and the early stage bits. Once we have a planning consent, it'll be a lot easier to get over the line. And so we did, and that was sort of early 2017, end of 2016, early 2017, when we sort of signed the lease. It was a lease originally, and then got the architects going with trying to create the building. And then that's 3 years ago. Yeah, time flies.
No, that's fantastic. I'm actually quite familiar with Ocean Terminal because Leith was the first place I lived in when I moved to the UK. I lived there for 2 years, and I believe I walked past your site, and I love it. And Leith, you are right, Leith was decimated by the recession, and now it's booming and it's becoming more vibrant. So whenever I go back to Leith, I like to stop past all my old haunts, and when your distillery opens, I'm definitely going to add that, and then, I might have to move back to Leith one day consistently to go and see.
Yeah.
But from what you've learned there, is there anything that you would change, or if you know anyone who's starting a distillery, is there anything you would tell them what to do or what not to do?
So we have this argument a lot, Ian and myself, because I mean, we end up like changing positions a lot. We always say, oh, we should have done this first. I think what I found recently, and especially in the last sort of 3-4 months, is that we always, from an analytical background, looking at this business, we have a gin brand and we launched that 18, 19 months ago, and we have obviously the distillery, and they're very different, they're very separate, and we never wanted to do gin. When we were first having meetings with investors, we were like, no, we're not doing gin. Everyone's doing gin. It's sold, man. Gin's over. And we met one guy who was an investor from Chicago, and he said, you're an idiot. Why? Of course you should do gin. He said, half the people are going to come to your distillery won't like brown spirits. They're going to be clear spirits people. And if you don't have gin to sell them, then you've missed out on a sale. And that's the dumbest thing in the world, because you have the most captive audience. They have paid to walk into your shop. Why would you not have something to sell them that's made by you? And gin's easy. It's not entirely true. I think gin is not easy. Gin is very difficult. I think, but we took from that. We said, you know what, he's actually right. So we changed strategy, and we didn't pivot at all. We just added gin on the side. And what we found recently is that having spent 2019 building up the brand, and we did really well. We sold a lot more than we expected, and we got great traction from the press, and we've won a lot of awards. I don't know if they mean anything, but they're nice to win. And then this year, we went into lockdown, and we thought, oh, that's it. The gin game's over. And, our sales in April nosedived. And then everyone who was sitting around at home started playing with their phones, finding online retailers and buying gin online. And our sales just went through the roof. And so May and June are our best months of all time for sales. And, we said, well, what's been so useful is that although the numbers aren't really commensurate with how much money we need to spend to build a massive construction, what the gin brand has done for us is prove the point. We've proven that we can create a brand. We've proven that we can distribute. We've proven that we can get international clients. We sell to Germany, we sell to France, we sell to Australia, we sell to Japan. First shipment to Japan's going out this month. We sell to Denmark, we sell across Europe, and those kinds of relationships are brilliant for the future, because the more products that we add onto the mix, the more that we already have a relationship with someone. We're like, hey, we're now launching another gin, or we have sherry, we have port coming. We've got some cool things on the pipeline that will, hey, well, here's some new make whiskey. Do you want to try and sell a bit of that? When we started that, I poo-pooed the gin idea in terms of its potential for impressing investors, because it didn't make that much money. It made a little bit of money, and it's nice, it's great to have, and it pays for all of our office costs. So the contribution that we get from it is brilliant, and it's 100% helpful. If we'd started it earlier, we'd be even further forward. And I think I'm a bit frustrated that we didn't start earlier. And the difficulty there is to say, yeah, just start a gin brand, man, and that'll please everyone. It won't, because it's really difficult. And I think we got really lucky with a few things on that gin brand along that journey, because with the packaging that we've ended up with, we didn't sit down and draw that out and go, that's what we're going to want to do. That's going to make $1 million. What we did was we had a few ideas and we threw them around and we changed it and we edited it, and then we were told we could do certain things, and as a result, the easiest one is that the gin bottle is a sort of classic Burgundy wine bottle shape, and we thought we chose that originally because we said, you know what, no one sells gin in a wine bottle shape. Everyone sells gin in a spirits bottle shape. So if we want to stand out on the shelf, we can choose a wine bottle. That'd be kind of different, kind of interesting, kind of fun. And Leith has a great history with making wine bottles. Leith had the Leith Glassworks and the Edinburgh Glassworks. They were based in Leith, and Leith was a huge area of importation of claret, and sherry and port, throughout the whole of the 18th, 19th century. So there's a huge history of wine bottle manufacture in Leith, and so this is a really interesting little hook that we can use as a bit of story. And story is very useful for selling spirits these days, because it's very hard to sell spirits because there's no story for most of them. They're just some guy in a shed, and so here's something we can latch onto. So let's do that. dear Mr. Glass manufacturer, can we buy some Burgundy bottles from you for our gin? We want the 70 CL ones, please, because that's what spirits are sold in. No, because all the Burgundy bottles are in 75 CLs, because that's what wine is sold. No, but the whole point was to make a really cheap one. You know, we were going to get like 5 cents a bottle here because that was so cheap, because you make millions of these bottles. Yeah, no, we make millions of 75 CLs, but not 70 CLs. What can we put 70 CLs in a 75 CL bottle? Yeah, but it'll look terrible. It'll look like you're underfilling them, and you'll get a bunch of complaints, and it'll ruin your brand. Oh. And then we got run to a glass manufacturer, and they said, we'll make you a 75 CL, a 70 CL bottle, but it's going to cost you. And, you know, and so we sort of fell into it. We thought it was going to be cheap. It ended up being really expensive instead. So that was fun. But, you know, but the truth is that I think talking to investors is difficult. You need to have a story. And we got so lucky with certain people we met at the start who liked the story enough to give us a little bit of money. And the gin brand has really helped us prove the point that we can make booze, sell booze, run a company efficiently, not waste money. You know, we're profitable now, which is a fantastic place to be. You know, we weren't for a long time, and you know, because of the sales surge recently, we hit profit. It's lovely, and also terrifying, because if you slip out of that, then I'm like, oh, quick, move some booze around, get this, make it flat. So the proving the point, even if you don't think this necessarily is going to make huge amounts of money, proving the point in terms of your capability as a business, I think, you know, running a side brand is very useful, because you're not making whiskey for a long time. So you've got to do something else to prove that you can make something. I guess that's my key. That's what I've got.
Oh, that's fantastic. It is great advice for anyone who's looking to start anything. If we head back to the distillery for a moment, what can you tell us about what you envision, the setup with your production and your maturation in your distillery?
One of the benefits of our site is that it's really small. And what that did to us is it forced us to do something that we would never have done normally, because it's really expensive. Now, you know, which is the build up. So, you know, the bit of land that we own is 1/3 of an acre. It's tiny. It's, you know, I would love a bit more land, but because of its size, it meant that we are now being forced to build a 9-story building and have a vertical process. Now, we're not unique in the world. McMira in Sweden has a vertical process, and the picture of their building was on our for a long time, just to prove that it can be done. They did choose to do it like that because they built it in a forest, and that's awesome. I think that's one of the most awesome things I've ever seen. You would choose to try and invest in that 8-story kind of style. For us, we were forced into it, but that was great because it meant that we were then able to be the vertical distillery, and that gives us another unique selling point that's really cool to talk about. It doesn't really change the flavor of the whiskey, but it changes the flow, and what it's allowed us to do is push all of the kind of process equipment into a kind of vertical cavern. You know, normally if you go to a whiskey distillery, especially the older ones, you kind of get led on a magical mystery tour around, and every now and then you'll go through a door that marks personnel only, and then down a narrow corridor, and then you'll see a tank, and then you go down another corridor and around the corner into a different building, and then you'll see another tank, and then you'll go across the road and around the corner, and then maybe another tank, and that's great because that's the kind of organic process of building up, you know, distilleries and expanding them over time. You know, you get this kind of onion layer of activity. For us, you know, we get one shot at this. We don't get to expand. So we wanted to build it as big as possible. You know, that was the largest feasible space that we had. So that meant creating this interior vertical space, which has floors in it. And about halfway through this process, we said, right, well, how's this going to work? We'll have a mash tun, we'll have all the fermentation vessels, and we'll have a stills at the bottom. So that's kind of like 4 stories worth of stuff. And about a year later, that was all rejigged because the process designers that we work with found so many problems with our initial. We were like, yeah, like tank there, and then tank's here, and then still at the bottom, case closed, right? Let's go to the pub. That didn't work, and so we've had to rejig a lot of it, but we've still managed to contain it. And then what happened was that we were in a design meeting. We had all this gantry, all this steel gantry. I'm the guy on the project who spends his whole life in construction meetings saying, I want the cheaper one. No, I know it's nicer, but please can we have the cheaper one? Can't afford it. And that's a kind of constant theme. And we were looking at all this steel flooring, and I was like, that's really expensive per square meter. Do we need all of it? And they said, well, no, you don't really need all of it, but you can't walk around if you don't have all of it. So I don't want to walk around. That floor, as long as I can get access to the tanks, you've got your fermenters sitting there, as long as you can get access to them, why do I need all this floor? And because the footprint of the process side is it's a bit bigger than a tennis court. And so you've got a lot of steel flooring there. You don't need them. And so they said, okay, yeah, no, let's just get rid of it. And what that's meant is that we've cut a lot of the floor away. So you end up with this really cavernous space. And ideally, you'll be able to look up and just see all these tanks literally hanging from the ceiling as alien incubation pods, because they're all held up sort of on their elbows and their kind of feet are dangling down into the next floor. And that happens with the mash tun, that happens with the washbacks. The stills are a bit different because they've got more underneath them, but you will have hopefully the sense of this awesome cavernous space and these little walkways that just spit out a little bit into the space, and you can see some stuff and then you can scuttle back to safety. So that's the kind of that's the kind of really awesome vista that kind of we've managed to create, again, just by virtue of me being cheap with steel flooring, that we realized that we can create these views. And so wherever you stand in the process area, you'll look up and you'll look down and you'll just see whiskey kind of all around you.
No, I love that. Honestly, I think that sounds really exciting. The idea of, starting a tour at the bottom or the top and heading up or down, and then being able to look down or look up, and you've got it surrounding you. You've got it above you, below you, because that is, we all love going to distilleries. But when you walk through, the amount of corridors that you walk through, and I know it makes me sound lazy when I say that, the amount of stark-like corridors you walk through, this is not my favorite part of the tour. So walking into that and being like, oh my God, I want to see that bit and that bit and that bit, that'd be amazing. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. And I think, what I found strange was, even as a whiskey fan, the parts of the process that, I've learned so much. I'm an accountant, I'm not a whiskey maker. And so, I thought I knew about how to make whiskey as a fan. And it turns out I knew absolutely nothing. And I've learned so much about this just by connecting all the pipes and sitting in meetings, HAZOPs meeting, where they go through endless flow diagrams showing this pipe goes here, this pipe goes here, and this is what this one does. Like, what does that one do? And everyone sort of rolls their eyes. And it's great being outside of the industry because I can ask dumb questions. And actually what I found fascinating is that so often with these, these really wicked smart engineers, you ask a dumb question and they get really excited. I was asking about bar bending schedules yesterday at a construction meeting because one of our structural engineers said, yeah, I need to update the bar bending schedule. I sort of put my hand up and I said, Mark, I don't want to sound like a dumbass because I know you've mentioned that phrase several times in the last 2 months, but what is a bar bending schedule? And he said, oh, Patty, I won't tell you now, but let me call you back after the meeting because it's really fun. And they love talking about this stuff. So, it's really fun to come in from the outside and get access to all this amazing intellect you're sort of dealing with. And I think the other thing about our design was that by virtue of going up, we then give ourselves a freebie because we get to create this bar at the top. And often, the tasting rooms of distilleries, sometimes they're great. Sometimes you get to taste in the warehouse. That's awesome. But we're like, again, if we're going to build up, we should use that. We should give ourselves a treat. And so, the issue with our design is always that when you're taking that process and you're saying, here's a lateral process that's normally like that, and we're now going to go like that, it's always going to be start at the top and go down, right? So you have your mash on at the top, and then you have your washbacks in the middle, and your stills at the bottom, which means that your tour will be come in, go up, go down. And then you're like, well, if you're going to do that, you have they're still a captive audience at this point. So if you have to push them back into a lift, go back up to the very top of the bar, well, that's their problem, not yours, because they're being told this is the next part of the tour, get back in the lift. So you don't have to drag them up. You're saying if you want to taste the whiskey mouth, get back in the lift. So you then take them up to the top, and boom, now you have this amazing view. And one of the things that I love most about our site is that we are next to the port, the actual port. So the Port of Leith has, went through a slight dip in the 80s when the shipyards closed and with it. It was bought by some new operators in the mid 90s, and they got it going again. And it's busy. It's so busy. There are so many interesting ships coming in and out. We had a construction meeting the other day just before the lockdown, and through the window of the cabin on the site, we could see this French battleship kind of cruising into the port. I think it was a battleship. The minesweeper, that's what it was. And this huge dome on the back where there's a radar equipment, and they're like, yeah, it's a French minesweeper coming to be refitted. And they have all this ship servicing, and it's right there. It happens every single day. There's ships coming in and out, and we're like, you sit at the top of that bar all day and just watch ships. Awesome. We had Norwegian Coast Guards. We had all this North Sea oil stuff coming in and out. I'm waiting for the submarine to come one day. There'll be a submarine. So it's a really fun place to be. And so you've got this real excitement from our team and from investors of having this bar at the top saying this, and we're not too proud to not sell other people's booze. We've been through distillery tours in the past where all they'll sell you is their own stuff. And I'm like, I don't care. I mean, our stuff's great, but everyone else's stuff is good too. The masses of good whiskey being made. So why don't we sell it all? And we want that bar at the top to be this, if we're not, on the world's top 10 whiskey bar lists in 10 years' time, then we failed. That should be a place that everyone in the whiskey world knows. It's like, you've been to the whiskey bar at the top of Port of Leith, that place is wicked. Like, that's what we want. We want people to come here and be like, bar is awesome, your collection is awesome. And we've got cool ideas about trying to change things in terms of whiskey menus and how to present the booze, because I think we're stealing them all. We've got no original ideas. Everything we're doing is stolen, and the whiskey menu idea is being stolen from BlackRock, this really cool whiskey bar in London, where other than displaying whiskeys by region, which I've always found really difficult, and also displaying them on a list, they said we're not having a list and we're not doing by region. We're going to be more like Yo Sushi. Not quite a conveyor belt, although that would be awesome, but cabinets. So they have cabinets around the room, and they dot the whiskeys with different dots. So rather than giving you a price list, you say a 1 dot is a $5, a 2 dot is $7.50, and a 3 dot is a tenner.
Yeah.
And you immediately forget about the money, and you just look at the bottles, and you then transfix. You're like, I don't care what's in it. I want to try that bottle. And also the cabinet, then themes. The cabinet could be themed smoky peaty whiskies, or sherry sweet rich whiskies, or super floral light whiskies, or and they'll throw it all in. The cabinet will be full of Japanese and American and Indian whiskies and Swedish whiskies and the Scotch, and it's all in the same cabinet. And we're like, that is the best idea we've ever seen, because you don't need to see a big phone book list. You don't need to see the back bar where you can barely see the bottles. You can go right up, see it there, and be like, I want to try that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. And then we can create, much better experience for the customer in terms of how they can engage with the product, how they can think about trying whiskey. Because you get the phone book app, and they're like, right, what do you want to do? And you go through, there's 15-year-old, 17-year-old, 20-year-old, and they'll all be lovely. But it's really hard to pick something from that kind of list. Whereas you're presented with those cabinets, themes, like, I'm thinking maybe a smoky one, so I'll go to the smoky cabinet. So there's all those ideas. Like I said, they're not original; they're stolen. They're free for anyone. You can have that, but we're totally going to do that.
Well, to give you an idea for not for you to steal this idea, but something to draw inspiration from. Just to mention, the BlackRock is a really cool whiskey bar. I remember, I believe this was me. I went to a whiskey bar where they had computer screens that displayed the prices of the whiskey. But instead of the price being static, it functioned as a stock market.
Yeah.
So the more that people are ordering whiskey, yeah, the higher that whiskey goes up. And you have this opportunity where you've got these really, really rare, really expensive whiskies, normally where the stock has plummeted because no one's ordered them. And then you buy one and you watch the screen tick back up and it shoots up 30 euros a nipple or something. And you're getting to the end of the night and like, I want to get a Kalila to finish it off, but the Kalila 12 is now 15 euro because everyone's drinking it. So I'm going to have to try this weird whiskey I've never had before. But it made for a very, very different experience. You've got to try so many different things. Sorry, just as far as cool whiskey bars go. Yeah.
I absolutely love it. And I think these are exactly the kind of ideas that are bringing people into the category. And you know, there's a guy in Edinburgh who's got a few really cool cocktail bars who has what he calls break-even bottles, where he says he's sick of all of these expensive auction price bottles being out in the marketplace, and instead he wants to see those being sold and drunk. Because there are too many collectible bottles not being drunk. So he puts the bottle in the bar and says, if I buy that for 200 quid, I'll just split that between every dram in the bottle and I'll sell them all break even. And once that's gone, we'll get another one in. Yeah. And I'm like, that's a cool idea, because again, that's bringing new things. I mean, infinity bottles are something else that have been popping up a lot during lockdown as everyone's experimenting. I think we could have an infinity bottle in the bar, you know, as we sort of keep building it up with the last half inch of whatever's in the bottles as we finish them off, and have like that could be the standard, you know. There's so much fun you can have, and I think this is why, when one of the reasons we wanted to get into this industry was so much of this fun was being had in the US. Craft bourbon, kicked off 15 years ago. It's a huge thing. There are now more distilleries in New York State alone than there are in Scotland, and they had 0 20 years ago. Okay, so I got up to 140 and I stopped counting. So I was like, right, well, they've beaten Scotland. We're 135, and 20 years ago there was 0, and they're all, I don't know if they're making good stuff or not. It's hard to find, but they're making something and they're trying things out. And I know the ones I do know are really good. Kings County in Brooklyn is really good. Hudson, obviously, everyone knows about. You see it. Shops. There are some really good things going on over there. And yet in Scotland, the craft end of the industry is a bit lacking. And people often ask me, and Ian and investor meetings, they say, "Oh, have you got? Are you worried about all of these new whiskey distilleries? Every time I open the paper, there's a new whiskey distillery." I'm like, no, there's not. There's been like 10 in 10 years. That's nothing compared to the US. They are all tiny. Like, we're all so small. Macallan is 30 million liters of pure alcohol a year. We'll be 400,000. Like, we're just not in the same league as these guys. And therefore, if we're bringing a bit of extra, a few more brands, great, because Scotch needs more brands. I think people want to keep trying things, and people want to keep trying new things. And I think when we look at what we've been doing with our whiskey research program in terms of new yeasts, I think we're trying to create this idea of variability a little bit in our production, in that I'm not necessarily convinced that consistency is something that we should be aiming for in whiskey. I think it's interesting. It's certainly something. Maybe some parts of our whiskey production could be consistent. And Ian's probably going to tell me off, because he'd be like, "That's not the company line," but I don't know what the company line is. I think that when you are playing with different things like wood and yeasts, you can create lots of interesting combinations. And when we're quite small, we have a slightly, because we have no brand, to destroy. So we can take risks that other companies cannot do. Macallan cannot sell peated whiskey. They'll be vilified. They cannot. And also, there's no point for them to release 200 bottles of something, because they're selling, I don't know, 40, 50 million bottles a year. What's the point of releasing 200 bottles of something? It's just not even it'll probably cost them more money to do that than they'll make from it, in terms of the time of the team and the marketing and creating a label and so on. Because they have, they're a big institution, and that's not their fault. That's just the problems of working in a large company. Whereas we can, look at Westland in Seattle. They're creating special editions every month, and they get a queue around the block every month for those dishes. So we think there's a lot more fun we can be had in things that maybe come and go and don't last forever. You know, if we create a thing and say, look, there's 1,000 bottles of that, that's all we've got. Once it's gone, I'm sorry, it's gone. And next year will be something different. And I think that's quite fun. And that keeps people coming back, because if you get a reputation for quality, then you're allowed a bit more leeway in terms of people trying your product range a bit more. So, you know, one thing that we're laser focused on as a company is product and the quality of the whiskey. You know, we will never sell anything that's not high quality. And, you know, the research program we have a research program collaboration with Heriot Watt's Brewing and Distilling degree program. And that's been really eye-opening in terms of not just the work we've done already in terms of trialing different yeast strains, those strains' effects on flavor. And what's fascinating is that, you know, you will never really hear a Scotch whiskey person talk about yeast very much. They talk about wood and thyme and water, and we're like, great, but barley and yeast are the two actual flavorful ingredients of whiskey. Why do we talk more about those? And Bruichladdich done fantastic things talking about barley, and Mark Rainier has taken it off to Waterford in Ireland, and they've I haven't tried it yet, actually. And what's frustrating is that the guys at the Stillhouse have got a couple of bottles of the new Waterford releases, and I haven't tried them yet. They're kind of mocking me with them, but I'm fascinated to see what's going on there. But no one's really gone with yeast, because yeast is a bit of a derogatory term. You know, people have yeast infections; they don't have yeast, you know, love. And so what we wanted to do is say, well, you know what? But yeast is fascinating because, you know, it's big in bourbon. Bourbon loves talking about yeast and proprietary yeasts. And in the UK, a lot of the yeast work that's been done for research is based around efficiency and how much alcohol can I produce from this yeast strain. And when you're running a production facility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that kind of efficiency is very important, because if you can tweak an extra 0.5% alcohol out of a batch, you know, because your mash tun is working all the time, your fermenters are going, you know, overclocking, and you don't have time, another 0.5% alcohol is a 0.5% productivity. That's a huge win for you. So why not? For us, we'd rather make a better flavor, sell it in smaller quantities, and you know, and maybe put the price up a little bit, and we can create. You know, we don't have the institutional overhead, so we don't have to sell for very much. You know, we should be selling whiskey at 40, 50 quid. We don't want to sell whiskies at 90, 100, 120 quid bottle, because that's not democratic. That's not helping the young whiskey consumer get into the category. That's, you know, I'd much rather be selling all of my bottles of whiskey at 40 quid and making sure that I sell out and I don't waste money on marketing. And in fact, I waste money on efficiency losses.
No, it's a fantastic idea. And what you mentioned there, it does bring us quite neatly onto two aspects: your maturation and what you're expecting your whiskey in the future to be. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so maturation's a fun one. A few years ago, I read a story about a distillery in New York State, obviously, and they were playing heavy metal in their warehouse. And the idea was that the sound waves of this like heavy bass would just agitate the barrel, the liquid in the barrels just a little bit, you know, like in Jurassic Park, you know, big impact tremor, water shakes a little bit, brand in motion, the atoms still go crazy, and you just get a slightly, I guess, accelerated maturation profile. And then there was a guy whose name escapes me for a second, who was putting barrels of bourbon on his boat and sailing around the Atlantic and then selling the bourbon from the boat, and that was a sort of boat-aged, you know, bourbon. And we thought, you know what? Here's the thing, like all whiskeys matures in big, dead still warehouses with very little airflow and very little temperature variation. Because Scotland's relatively temperate, it doesn't change very much, you know, day to night, winter to summer, not like New York or Kentucky. And so we thought, well, what if we tried to make this accelerated? What would happen if we took our whiskey, some of our whiskey, not all of it, some, and we put it in a brand new oak barrel? So you're getting a lot of vanilla, a lot of those deep char, toasted notes, and that kind of vanillins from you associate with bourbon. And you put that barrel in a shipping container, and you put that on a barge, and you put the barge on the sea. And so the barge will rock, because not the open sea, just the inland sea. And as it rocks, the barrels will slosh around a little bit. And a shipping container is a hot metal box. And joke all you want, but it does get sunny in Scotland sometimes. And any sunshine on a shipping container during the Scottish summer will heat that up like a tin can, and then at night it'll dissipate very quickly, and you'll get these temperature variations. And we thought that will create something that I don't know what it's going to taste like, but at least it's interesting. And so that's something that we're kind of thinking and doing. And this sea-aged Scotch, we had various meetings with HMRC and the Scotch Whisky Association, and we sort of said, this is our plan, and we could tell that they also try to think of reasons why we couldn't do it. They couldn't think of any. So far, that's the plan. So that's one thread. Another thread is actually just to age in Leith. Leith used to be a huge maturation area, and there's one bonded warehouse left, and it's very full. And so we are in the process right now of getting some space in Leith. So our maturation will be just around the corner, and we'll have that connection again. And people, the idea of being next to the sea is mostly derided by professional whiskey people about having any effect on the flavor, and they're probably right. But it's still nice to be by the sea when you are connected with it so closely as a brand. Wood flavors, again, one thing that this whole thing about regions in Scotch is difficult, because you get unpeated Islay malts, you get peated Speyside malts, you get every region doesn't really have a flavor profile anymore, they may have done 50 years ago, and that's good. I don't really care about the regions, but in general, we will be a lowland malt, whether we like it or not, and that's cool. So let's use that. What is a lowland malt? Well, theoretically, if you go back 120 years, they had these big flat bottom stills that they would pump out high volumes of liquid from. And again, it's all about efficiency, and by doing that quickly, you distill very quickly, you get a very light floral character. And Glenkinchie is probably the closest in Scotland to that original lowland malt style. It's hard to find it, and most of it goes into Johnny Walker, but it's a really, really beautiful spirit, I think, when you can get hold of the single malt. And that's the kind of the general thrust, is to say, well, if we're going to have a house style, we're going to be that sort of lighter floral idea. And that means it's great for us, because it means that our yeast research program can come forward. We're not going to drown it in peat. We're not going to drown it in sherry or heavy bourbons, or too much Trockenbury and Eislinger as a final cask finishing. We're going to let the whiskey talk and let the wood just take a step back for a second. And so we'll be thinking more about second fill, third fill bourbon casks, very low wood impact on the flavor, and just try and let those yeast flavors that we're getting when we make the new make come forward and let them develop, rather than just drowning them in wood. So our because the yeast program is fascinating. Vicky is our research associate. She sits there, and every week she distills 2 strains, and she brews up another couple of strains, and we've got a library now of about 40 different yeast strains that she's sort of collected up. And the variation, same malt, same process, same still, same everything. The only difference is the yeast, and the difference in the flavor profiles is huge. Some of them are revolting, some are not. Some of them taste of almost nothing, and some of them have lovely, lovely flavors, and we are really excited to scale up. Now, we're about to do a scale up operation. She was dropping off a tiny 2 liter still, it's literally kind of passing test tubes around, and I dropped one once. That wasn't popular. What we want to do is build up to a pilot still size, 50 liter production run, and we had a plan to do that in March, and of course that was scotched, so we are trying now to work out when we can get that going again. So hopefully come the autumn we'll be able to do some more scale up trials and move it up. But even if we can't, it doesn't really matter, because we know it's interesting actually. We all smelled them, and Ian and I was sort of marking the sheets off and saying, right, this one high score, and bizarrely we agree on almost nothing, but we both seem to agree on 2 or 3 of these samples for the scale up process. And so I don't mind, we'll do all of them because we'll have time. I think the distillation program will be sort of every 3 months. We might change the recipes. So 3 months of running a single strain, change the recipe down 3 months, and so we'll build up of that 3-month production supply. We'll then direct some into certain casks, our second bourbon cask. Some will go into the sea scotch stuff. Some will be into some experiments, throwing a sherry butt, see what happens, and keep building up. And so what will happen is we'll just keep building up this endlessly replicating library of whiskies in the warehouse that we will then blend up into our single malt releases in the future. And we want to create these vintage releases. And so back to what I was saying earlier about variability, we probably will try and have some kind of consistency at some point, but I'm more interested, and that's going to be fun. We'll have a signature, 5-year-old one. But this variability is allowing the whiskey to evolve over time. And so if you come back to us, every year, hopefully we'll have something new for you to try, something different for you. And it might not be nice, it might be horrible, but at least it's different.
No, that's fantastic. We did speak earlier before the broadcast. You mentioned that you wanted to do those vintage releases where. Yeah. And that will be this is the Port of Leith, the 2025 2026, and as a whiskey fan, as a whiskey geek, I really love that, because that talks more to, you're looking to put out different liquids every single time. It's not the same thing the entire time. When you're doing those vintage releases, I mean, are you going to throw all consistency out the window and do maybe a different yeast strain or a different barley strain or a different barrel type and a different year just to really get the people?
I think so. I mean, the vintage idea is something that it's another idea we've stolen. The wine industry has used the word vintage for decades, and it's a very powerful word. It's a really cool word. It's got a lot of positive premiumization associated with it. If you pick up a bottle of wine that says vintage, you kind of feel that's better, and it probably is. With Scotch, no one really does it, and we thought, well, if again, we've got a once in a lifetime opportunity to start making something a bit different. So let's try and touch on this word vintage and start a release of a 2022. It'll be aged 7 years, released in 2029, and that'll be our first vintage release. And what it'll be is whatever we made in 2022. And I can guarantee you, 7 years down the line, we'll look back and think, gosh, how little we knew back then of what we were supposed to be doing. But we certainly won't sell it unless it tastes good. But I think the idea is that we will obviously have to blend up whiskies from that year that we've made together and create a whiskey. I don't expect it to be the same every year, but I do expect a vintage release once a year will be our signature release. That'll be the major thing that we try and achieve, is a high quality once a year release of whiskey that was made probably 7 years before, or maybe 8, or maybe 10. I mean, we'll have to stop the clock at some point. Once you stop the clock and start releasing, then you're stuck with that time frame. So if you start with 7. If you wait for 8, then you get to 8. We'll have to wait and see until the whiskey is good enough to release. Maybe it's 12. But I do think there'll be a little bit of variability there. Yeah, I think the consistency will be in our approach to quality, not in this specific flavor. If that makes sense. Because I think, again, it's all about what are our core values. And coming from a tech industry where people went on and on about values and like, what are our values as a company? What are your values as a human? And I used to rubbish a lot of that. You sit in the back row and sort of smile as all these, tech wannabes are like, yeah, man, yeah, we want to be number one. Enron, world's greatest company. And I'm like, well, you can have those values. We have to live by them. And I think, when we talk to our staff and we talk about what we want to be as a company, number one thing on every bit of paper is always, have you made a product that's good? And if you're not doing that, everything is pointless. Everything is a waste of time. If you're not making good quality product, you're not taking advantage of the luck that we've had, the opportunity we've been given, and you're just, you're spunking it on short-termism. Just get out the door, sell. I don't care. I want to make some money. We want to try and create focus on product that's borderline or totalitarian regime, and being like, if it's not good quality, we're not going to do it. And so if we instill that in the team, and specifically in the actual professionals who make the whiskey, not me, but the people who do it, so our distilling team who actually know how to make whiskey, and this is their dream too, is that we then get to make only high quality stuff. And so I don't worry so much about releases. I know it's going to be good. I think we just, our job is just to push them a bit harder and say, well, just try something new and don't worry about it if it doesn't work. We'll work it. We'll worry about that at the time. But let's keep innovating. Let's keep with new ideas.
Oh, fantastic. And I guess the last kind of professional question I want to ask you then is, obviously COVID will have delayed this, but when do you suppose we would be able to go to Leith and visit the Port of Leith Distillery? Do you have any date?
Yeah, so
any expected date? Watch this space time.
Yeah, no, we're back on site. We have completed the most scary parts of the construction, which are the piling. So, our land is new ground. It's reclaimed. It's part of an old harbour, and if you go back 100 years and find a map, we're in the sea. So no one really knew what was underneath us apart from sand. And I never worried about this, because I always said, well, look at Ocean Terminal. That weighs, I don't know, 1 trillion tons. That's next to us, so that's going to be fine, right? And eventually the engineers came back and said, well, it's not really how it works. You're going to have to drill some piles here, and there's going to be a lot of them, and it's going to be expensive. And if you don't find bedrock, you just have to keep going. And the original budget we had was for piles that went down 42 meters into the ground, which is taller than the building is. And it was about £1 million worth of piling. And we said, right, well, let's hope it doesn't go down that far. But we now completed the piling because we managed to get the site up and running again in June. And so we ended up piling only 16.5 meters, which is a bit of a win. And that's the scariest part of the whole construction program gone now. So piling is over. We're now doing, I think today was sewage drains. That's a good thing to have. And we will hopefully never have to stop again. I think the team on site have their new rules and regulations around COVID and masks and masses and masses of hand sanitizer. And but it's still, at the moment it's a relatively small team. There's only about 5 of them, I think, at the moment, because right now there's just this. We can only do a small team because that's all the drains need. And towards the end of the year, it gets trickier, because as you start to go up, once the foundations are laid and and you start to do the meccano of the steel going upwards, then you do need a lot of people, and they will be close to each other. And so, we're kind of hoping that come October, November, when we're doing that steel work, that's when hopefully things will have calmed down a bit. But assuming that we're okay and everything goes to plan, then we should be finished in Q4 next year, which is still a long way away. Not gonna lie. I'd love to do tours of the construction site. You want to come down and see the steel going up, and just give me a call. Do anything. But hopefully, if we can get a paying guest in before Christmas next year, then that's a win, and that's on time, on budget. Everyone's happy. It still feels like a long way, but we lost 3 months to COVID, and the plan had to be stretched a wee bit because of they've had to extend some of the time scales a little bit. Maybe we can squeeze them back again. There's always time to be saved. Piling finished a week early, so there are slots available. So, but yeah, before Christmas next year. I mean, that's before we get into the whiskey. I mean, gee, this business is so long term. You've got to have a very long imagination to get through it.
Look, we do hope that we can see it, because it sounds absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure everyone who is watching and will watch us in the future is going to be very excited. And I kind of hope to look back on this in 5 years' time after I've hopefully been guys tried your whiskey and gone,
Marcus, come back to me. Come and see us. Well,
I really want to come back to Leith. I want to go back. I want to move back to Leith so incredibly much. Unfortunately, I can't. My sister's getting married. I've got to go back to Australia, and that kind of screws all my plans for a while. But when I get back to the UK, because I will be back to Leith, because I miss the old stomping grounds.
Cool.
Anyway, that completes our kind of oh God, it is. I go back probably about once every 3 months. I've been back to Leith to see it, and every time it's incredibly different. The street I lived on looks as bad and smells as bad as it always did, but everywhere else looks better. So that's nice. That's. So that finishes all that. Now, I'm sure I told you this when I first emailed you about it, but I always like to finish these broadcasts with a quiz and anagram section.
Okay. I love a quiz.
Did I tell you that?
I don't think you did.
Did I forget to mention that?
My God, the Countdown Conundrum.
No, okay.
I'm really bad at the conundrums.
Don't worry. It's 5 quiz questions and 5 anagrams, and they're all about whiskey. And because of where you are and because of who you are, I've put everything is Edinburgh whiskey related and Edinburgh Distillery anagrams. So it's a very small pool, and I'm not going to lie to you, I looked on your website to get some of it. So some of the information is on your website. So if you don't get this,
I see Ian wrote all of that. I mean, I guess I probably have read it at some point, but he was the one who did all the whiskey research. All right, I'm screwed. Let's go.
Okay. Your first quiz question: what Leith-based whiskey company went bankrupt in 1898 and was key in the whiskey market's collapse at that time?
I know this one. That's the Patterson Brothers.
Patterson Brothers, yeah.
They're my favorite whiskey company of all time.
It's that. I desperately want to get of their blend just to try it, because I know there's so much history about it, but I want to read about the crash while drinking some Patterson whiskey. I think that'd be amazing.
I think, like, if I ever, I mean, we've looked a lot to try and get hold of it, and there's this wonderful lady called Justine who runs whiskey walking tours around Leith, and they're fascinating because she shows you all the old buildings and all the old things, and she also managed to get hold of really rare bottles of whiskey, and we've kept saying, Justine, and some Patterson Brothers. She's like, it's gone. There's none left. One day I'll find a bottle and we'll drink it and it'll be horrible, but we'll find it. If I find it, Marcus, I'm gonna call you up.
How cool! Oh yeah, how cool would it be? It doesn't matter if it's bad.
I know.
How cool would it be to try it? Oh my god!
I'd love it. I'd love to find it.
Anyway, what distillery, founded in 1885 and still running, is the largest grain distillery in Edinburgh?
I know that one too. That's the North British. We met them the other day. They're really cool people. Yeah, they're cool. Their boardroom is amazing. Yeah. They've got pictures of all of the original board directors. So every board director who goes there gets their photograph on the wall, and this row of photographs goes round and round. And the very first two are Andrew Usher, of the Usher Hall fame, who used to be a huge whiskey brand in Edinburgh, in the world, and the other one is John Crabby of Crabby's Ginger Wine, but actually he was also a whiskey maker. And of course, this is Crabby's Whiskey Distillery that they've just opened up around the corner from us, in another part of Edinburgh. So, yeah, very interesting place. Okay, I haven't completely disgraced myself. I'm okay. I can relax now. Two from two. Let's go.
No, you're doing fantastic. By the way, I love North British whiskey. It's really good stuff.
Yeah. And again, hard to find. They could sell loads more if they were allowed to.
Well, I think the problem is you see a lot of North British bottlings from independent bottlers, and no one knows the name, which is great because you see like 25 to 30-year-old North British bottlings got 50, 70 euro, and they're fantastic. You kind of want.
I mean, because it's a joint venture, it's owned by Edrington and Diageo. There's a certain restriction on what they're allowed to do as a company with their supply, because most of it goes to Amos Grouse or to Johnny Walker. So, they've got to, keep their paymasters happy. But every now and then they're allowed to do these sort of independent releases. So, I agree. I'd love them to do more because I think single grain is underappreciated as a category.
Very much so. But this brings us neatly on to another question, actually. Which whiskey company has its spiritual home above old wine merchant cellars in Leith in Edinburgh? It's a really poorly phrased question.
Is that the Scotch Malt Whisky Society?
It is the Scotch Malt Whisky Society at the Vaults in Edinburgh, yeah. For those who don't know, the Vaults in Edinburgh, the Scotch Malt Whisky Society spiritual home is named that because they are above old vaults and old wine cellars that I think some of them are still in use for storing alcohol, not from the society, but from different shops and different merchants. But apparently, there used to be tours where they would take you down and walk you through the vaults. I worked for the society for 2 years. I never got to see the vaults. I'm incredibly pissed about that. I don't know if anyone did. I think my boss did get to see them once, but he said they had to call a man who came with a key, and he was very angry. So one day I do want to see them because I love the idea of, underneath Leith there being this just huge rackings of wine and whiskey everywhere.
I mean, this is Leith's history is as a whiskey bonding, storage facility, and wine too. There's a lovely book called Knee Deep in Claret. It's a whole history of Edinburgh's and Leith's trade with wine over the centuries. And it's a long history, and a lot of those old buildings, anything with high ceilings was just a whiskey or a wine storage place, or sherry.
Yeah.
Lots of sherry. Sherry used to be great.
Well, sherry, especially that port, the Port of Leith. It's got incredible historical value, which is one of the reasons why your distillery is so interesting, because you're bringing back whiskey to its historical port in Edinburgh, which was one of the most historical ports in that region.
Absolutely.
So straight back. It's great.
Yeah, before shipbuilding kind of took over in the early 20th century, whiskey, with the Patterson brothers, they were the peak of the bubble. But there were scores, of distilleries down there, and loads of really great brands that came from Leith. I won't mention them in case they're the answers to your next question, but we'll talk about it at the end.
Well, actually, my next question is, when did the last single malt whiskey distillery in Edinburgh close before this revival we're now seeing?
1925.
You've got to bang on 1925. And the next question, what was the name of that distillery? It had about 3 or 4 names. If you can name any of them, I'll give you the point.
I think that's where my luck has run out.
If anyone is watching this, feel free to comment. But I will say this is it's not a particularly clever name. It's very, you would say this name and you would know exactly where this place was.
I really should know that. I mean, I don't know the date, but not the name. I'm a numbers guy. That's my problem. I'm gonna go with. I mean, there was one in Cannon Mills. It's a very strange place to say though. Can we get a clue? Can I buy a vowel?
You can buy a vowel. Every single name for this distillery contains the letter E.
Something about Leith. Was it the Leith Distillery?
It wasn't the Leith Distillery. Think bigger.
The Edinburgh Distillery.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they didn't go. Yeah, really, the Edinburgh Distillery. So it wasn't initially the Edinburgh Distillery. I believe initially it was Newington Distillery, then Glen Skeens Distillery, and then the Edinburgh Distillery. That closed in 1925, and I think the offices were finally demolished in the 1980s. But yeah, I mean, I want to point out that you had no idea that I would be asking these questions, or questions of any nature. But you got 4 out of 5 of those.
I'll say that.
I mean, I'll give you 4 out of 5 for the last one, but that's some damn good stuff.
Take it all.
Not many people. Generally, it tends to go a lot worse. I apologize for anyone previously who was watching this. Okay. So now it brings us on to the anagram round. Every single anagram is a past or present Edinburgh-based whiskey distillery.
Okay.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting. I know you'll get 3 of them. All right. Your first past Edinburgh-based distillery is the Tong Snob Inn. I have it written up on a whiteboard, by the way, if you need to see.
Ooh. Tong Snob Inn.
To anyone who is watching this at the moment, feel free to comment if you believe you know what distillery this is in reference to.
Is it Bonington?
This is Bonington's. This is Bonington's distillery. Yeah.
Which is and that Bonington is where the New Crabbies distillery has popped up. Just sort of further up.
Bloody hell, really?
Yeah, it's an old industrial estate. They've got quite a cool spot actually, just next to the river.
That's really cool. Next time I head back to Leith in probably about a year, I'll have to go up. Anyway, your next anagram is, if someone was to offer you a glass of Cold Hen whiskey, where would that be from? Cold Hen.
Ah. I'm struggling here.
Okay, this is 2 words. The first word is quite prominent in Scotland, and there's a few distilleries with that first word.
Loch Ned.
It's not Ned. It's not Loch Ned.
Loch Den.
It's not Loch Den.
Loch End. Loch End.
It's Loch End. Loch End Distillery. Loch End Distillery. Apparently, I think I was reading about this on your website.
Like I said,
I believe it functioned for an incredibly short time. Don't worry. I won't hold that against you. It's
just pull up our website and see what else she says there.
No. Don't pull up your website. That'll give all the answers away. That would be a form of cheating.
We've used lockdown to create a new website. We've got a brand new website launching quite soon, which is really cool. It's now getting us ready for the future. So have a look in about a month's time, and it'll all be up and running.
We definitely will. We can't wait for the new website. Anyway, if someone were to offer you a glass of whiskey and it tasted like ice barbs, what whiskey would that be?
Crabbies.
Crabbies. Yeah, Crabbies. I was going to say the clue was going to be that they're right around the corner from you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I cannot stand ginger wine.
I have a bottle.
Every time I'm going to think of that.
I think Crabbies ginger wine and whiskey in a cocktail done properly. It's a sort of, I think, whiskey and ginger is one of those kind of pairings that just works every day of the week. And you can have a whiskey mac, you can have a little hot toddy, you can warm it up, or you can have a penicillin, or there are so many interesting ways of mixing whiskey and ginger together. Penicillin is 100% my favorite whiskey cocktail, and you can make one at home, which I remember making a few years ago with Crabbies and a good blended malt like a monkey shoulder or something. A lot of ice, bit of spritz, bit of soda water. It's gorgeous. So on its own, I would drink it. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it just ginger wine. I never got the taste of ginger wine. It was always something that I did not like. I'm not a big ginger fan, and I really want to see, in a weird way, I want to see Crabbies releasing a whiskey that's matured in a Crabbies ginger wine cask. I don't know if that wine has to go in a cask. I'm not that well versed in ginger wine, but I would love to see that.
I will call up Dave Brown, who runs it, and say, look, mate, here's a challenge, and see if he'll do it.
At least the finishing. If you could buy a ready-made bottle of a whiskey mac, that would be something.
I'm surprised more distilleries don't do these RTDs. I mean, RTDs have kind of been booming the last few years, and I think there's a little bit too much going on there. But I think there are a lot of really cool whiskey cocktails that, again, this whole veneration of single malt, that you must drink it only on its own, neat, no ice, no cold, nothing in it. I think that's a mistake. I think penicillin, which is a mix of straight up single malt with a bit of smoky whiskey led on top at the last minute. It proves that mixing different whiskeys in the glass can create fantastic things. And let's not forget, single malt whiskey is all blended. Like, it's a blend of lots of single malts. Like, a bunch of barrels are all blended together to make a single malt. So let's not try and persuade ourselves that that's not already been mixed up. Don't venerate it, just drink it, enjoy it.
No, I agree with you there. In a funny way, so RTDs never really took off in the UK, but I'm Australian, and I remember when I was still living in Australia, I actually contacted a distillery based in Canberra, and he said, "Oh, I'll send you out some samples so you can try the whiskey." And the samples arrived, and it was 3 cans, and it was his whiskey with Coke, and his whiskey with ginger ale, and his whiskey with lemonade. And I emailed him back. I phoned him up and I said, I actually, when I got the samples, I meant I wanted to try the whiskey. And he said, oh, no. I'm distilling and maturing whiskey to go straight into RTDs. I'm not going to bottle my whiskey. It will only be done in a can with soft drink. I was like, completely defeats the point of what I'm doing, but I guess I'll try it. It was quite nice, but at the same token, it was like, that's a very different way. You've started a whiskey distillery purely to make canned whiskey and soft drink. That's something.
Yeah, I mean, great. That guy's got a dream. He's got a business model. He's running with it. I love it. I mean, you see more of it. I know. I mean, you go to Japan, and what I love about Japan sometimes is that they're completely unashamed about certain things, and something you can buy in all convenience stores is highballs in a can. So you can get a can of Suntory whiskey and soda water, ice cold from the fridge, and you just sip that on the train on the way home. And I think that's brilliant because canned G&T has exploded over here, and I think a whiskey and soda, a highball, is a hugely underappreciated drink. It's such a refreshing drink. It's not sweet. You're not loading up with sugar in the afternoon. Gin and tonic is great, but it's sweet. But a highball is just whiskey and water, so a bit of salt. So it lets the whiskey taste come through, but it's so refreshing. And I think, next time don't pour G&T on a hot sunny afternoon. Pour a highball, and I think you'll feel more refreshed.
Well, honestly, I always think a whiskey highball is fantastic. If for some reason I don't have whiskey available, or if I don't feel like whiskey, instead of doing a G&T, I pour myself a cognac and tonic as well, because that is refreshing, and it's the exact same principle. But I think the idea that these drinks are venerated and you can only drink them by itself, maybe a ball of ice, a bespoke ice cube, or maybe a touch of spring water from the finest Highland spring. That idea has somehow persevered, despite the fact that the majority of drinkers know you can drink whiskey any way you want to, and it's going to taste fantastic. But hopefully someday. Anyway, our next anagram is, if Lord Yoho was to make you a highball, what whiskey would Lord Yoho use? For anyone who's just joined, Lord Yoho is an anagram. Yeah, there you go. Santa Grandma Holyrood. Holyrood is arguably, in a weird way, your biggest competition because you guys both start at the same time and you're doing things very differently, but they are.
They are. I mean, what's great about the whiskey industry, something I really like about the whiskey industry, is that everyone is very nice. And it's weird to say that. But, I honestly will tell you, I don't think, there's a competition between us. I think we're all so small that, the growth of the whiskey industry as a whole will quite happily swallow up our production. And they are doing some really cool things over there. Jack, their head distiller, is wicked smart guy, very, very smart. And Dave and Rob, who started it, know exactly what they're doing. And I think they have got a really cool thing. And what's good about it is it's slightly different to us. So we're not all competing in the same place, the same space. So I think I don't worry about competing with them as such. If anything, I want to be collaborating with them. I'd love to create, with them and with Krabby's, an Edinburgh blended malt. I think that'd be a really cool thing to do. I think, the more that Edinburgh as a whiskey production place is, the more people who start up, and we saw just this week in Houghton House, a new application for a small distillery. We're so tiny, all of us, like we're just not competition for anybody. That there's easily capacity in the industry to swallow our production and enjoy it. And I think the more, I keep saying the more small distilleries that are popping up, the more likely it is that Scotch will retain that premium brand that it's had over the last 100 years. Because you can't sit back and expect it to sit there forever. 150 years ago, it was Irish whiskey that was the number one. And Irish whiskey was the top thing, and it was only Prohibition killed that off. Prohibition, Scotch was kind of sneaky in two ways. One, because it wasn't so well drunk, it meant that people didn't associate it as much with the evils of whiskey drinking as they did with Irish whiskey. If you go back and watch something like, watch something like Hot, they're all drinking Irish whiskey in their speakeasies, they're not drinking Scotch. And so, in fact, Scotch was sold through pharmacies and chemists as a something to, nerve tonic. And you can get a prescription for Scotch. Whiskey, drinking went up during Prohibition, not down. That's a stat for you. And the other thing that happened during Prohibition is the Scots were better smugglers because they could ship it into the Commonwealth, so into the Caribbean and into Canada, and then just nip it over the border, whereas the Irish could not. So that was the second problem. And ever since, all the Irish distilleries closed, and only now are you getting a kind of resurgence of whiskey distilling in Ireland. And that's fantastic because, again, anything new, people try harder because they haven't got a brand, they haven't got a legacy, and they have to make something people are going to try. So, the guys at Teeling and Waterford with Mark, and like, there's really cool things happening. And I think that's great for the category. And the same for us, Holyrood and Krabby's and us and the guys in Glasgow. Everyone is doing different things, and everyone is pushing to make better product, and that can only be a good thing.
I mean, I'm living for the day that I can go to Edinburgh and I can go on an Edinburgh whiskey tour that takes you to 3 or 4 or more distilleries through Edinburgh. How amazing will that be?
You know what?
That'll be stunning.
October next year, I reckon you'll be able to hit 3. If only the North British would open up.
October next year. Yeah, I doubt North British would, but if you could go from Holyrood, because it's quite funny actually. I said I lived in Leith, and I would have been 15 minutes walk from where your distillery is going to be. My partner lived 3 minutes walk from Holyrood when we were both in Edinburgh. And my best mate lived around the corner from where Krabby's now is. So it'll be a great, we'll all be able to go back and it'll be we're going to see this location, that location, that location, and it's all the old haunts. But I'm so excited for it. I think it's going to be amazing.
It's going to be awesome. And Edinburgh's so small, you know, it's not hard to get around and see all these different places in a day or a weekend. And, you know, you come to Edinburgh, yeah, you could easily hit all 3 distilleries in an afternoon if you really wanted to. And you should, absolutely, because we're all doing different things, and we'll all have different things to try. You know, I think we'll be the best.
No, definitely. You'll have to.
I would say.
Well, I think. You guys could very easily be the best. We don't know. We won't know until you open, and we're all going to have to go and try and see, and then we'll make our minds up. But only after we've seen you do we want to make our minds up.
Yeah.
So we have high hopes.
Got to finish this construction.
That brings us on to our final anagram, and our final anagram is pothole rift. If you were walking home and fell into a pothole rift, what whiskey did you have too much of? For those watching, the anagram is pothole rift. This is a Edinburgh-based past, present, or future distillery. It's very close to Patty.
It's like watching Countdown, only if the contestants are already stupid.
So 8 out of 10 cats does Countdown.
Except I'm not that funny. Is it one word or 2 words?
It's 3 words. Technically, there is a 4th word at the start that I didn't include.
So I can get the.
But Patty, yep, the.
Oh, wait, hang on. Is this Port of Leith?
Ignore
this is Port of Leith.
Port of Leith.
Awkward. Like I said, it's like watching Countdown, but the contestants are really dumb.
Everyone, and I mean everyone, struggles with an anagram of their own distillery. No one has gotten their own distillery or brand or anything straight away. It generally takes people at least as long as it took you. It often takes people a lot longer. There's only one person who got their brand very quickly, and that was because it was a simple anagram. I'm sorry, I know who you are. No, for Kiro, I couldn't do a distillery of theirs. I couldn't do Kiro as I can't even remember what I did for their anagrams. That was ages ago. That was like 2 months ago. It's been too much whiskey. No, look, I think you got like 8.5, 9 out of 10. You're very easily in the top 5. In the top 5 who have done this, and you didn't even know what was happening. You were definitely, oh yeah, of course, mate, yeah, you did brilliantly. That was fantastic. The main competition you have to face are the likes of Billy Abbott from the Whiskey Exchange, Dave Worthington of Tiki Whiskey, like guys who all day, every day is read, write, and drink whiskey. Like the amount of samples that go across Billy's day every single day.
I bet.
I love to think about it because it must be on it.
Yeah. Whew, right. Okay. Well, I feel slightly good on myself. I didn't trace our own website. That's the most important thing. Which I totally read and completely digested, and I know everything about our own website because that's the thing that we do every day is read our own website.
You're building a distillery. You've got a lot going on. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
Yeah.
I guess my final question for you is in what ways, during COVID, in what ways can the whiskey community support the whiskey industry? And also, in what ways can we support Port of Leith? Where could we go to buy a bottle? How could we do that? What do you think?
That's it. Well, Marcus, that's a great question. I think, obviously, buy more whiskey and especially support the younger brands. I think there's a lot of small companies out there that are just starting up that have product to sell. And, if you think just looking at Scotland specifically, you've got King's Barnes, you've got Glasgow Whisky Distillery, you've got Holyrood, although they're not selling much whiskey at the moment, but you've got, these smaller companies have product to sell, and it's worth trying. I think the Glasgow stuff is really fun. I like it a lot. I think the King's Barnes stuff is excellent. I think, those, and there are lots of other small distilleries that are starting up, that have product to sell, and support the smaller brands is one thing. For us, we have our online shop at leithdistillery.com. And if you were interested in our gin, which is a very refreshing lime-forward gin with a hint of pink peppercorn on the back note, and very, very classic London dry style, we have some really cool cocktail videos on our Instagram. If you want to see some ideas as what to do with the gin, we think gimlet with gin and lime juice is awesome. We think that French 75, which is gin and champagne, is a really, really fun drink. And a great way to give yourself an excuse to open a bottle of champagne. That's really cool. And the other thing that we have on the website, as well as some other brands, including Glasgow Whisky, which you can buy from us as well as from Indirect, is our sherry. And I have to say, I think the sherry that we import from Spain, and it's a really cool story about creating a link with the place we're going to buy barrels from. So our sherry will come from this company, Bodegas Barón, who are based in Sanlúcar de Barrameda, and that is in Sanlúcar, so in Jerez region, and it is gorgeous. And I think if you want to try something a bit different this summer, get a bottle of sherry, play with some cocktails, mix it up with some tonic, with some soda water, drink it cold, warm, throw it in with some bourbon and make some longer cocktails like bit of ginger. There's some really fun things you can do with sherry. It's delicious. It does not last long when I open a bottle in our house. And I think a bottle of gin and a bottle of sherry are a fantastic way for to support the industry. But no, please buy from the small guys. Buy the young stuff. I think the young whiskey is really great. I think really underrated, really young whiskey, because again, we've been given this message that old is better, and I think Glasgow and King's Barnes have both proven that a 3-year whiskey is really delicious to drink. So get your hands on some.
No, I couldn't agree with you more there. Buy the young stuff, because you are right. The industry has drilled it into us that you have to buy older stuff for it to be good. That's not true. Buy young stuff; it's fantastic, and support local.
Yeah.
Jump onto distillery.com. Oh yeah, jump onto leithdistillery.com. Grab yourself a bottle of that. What was the? Just forgotten that. Yeah, Linden Lime. Grab yourself a bottle of
Linden Lime. The name. So the name is all about James Lind, who was an Edinburgh doctor who made the link between curing scurvy on ships and using citrus fruits and lime, because lime tastes nice. So Linden Lime. Just don't try staying out after 3 gin and tonics in a bar that's really noisy.
Look, that is all the time we have today. But Patty, I want to say it's been fantastic to have you on. You've been absolutely amazing. The story of your distillery, the story of you, hearing everything from you has been absolutely stunning. I cannot wait for October next year to hopefully go and tour your distillery. Everyone is watching presently, in the future, whenever. If you're watching this, go and visit, or at least look up Port of Leith Distillery. If you can tour it. If you can't, go to leithdistillery.com to figure out everything about them, book yourself a tour in, get yourself some Linden Lime gin. It's all going to be fantastic. And congratulations on both the quiz round and also on your your 4-week-old little baby boy, was it?
A little baby boy. Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't hear him downstairs. He was kicking off a second ago. So, yeah, thanks, mate. And Marcus, this has been awesome. It's been really fun to talk because we don't really get many opportunities to talk for an hour and a half about the distillery and what we're up to. So I appreciate it. If anyone's lasted this long, well, fair play. Congrats. Let me know and you get a free tour when we open. Just turn at the front and just say, I watched that entire podcast with Malts with Mates and Marcus, so I want my free tour. Just turn up. Tell me that and you're in. Use the code Marcus on the website.
All right. I'll tell everyone I know to mention that they watched this and they're raving to go. Yeah. But we got to finish it now. But to everyone who's watching, thank you for tuning in, and thanks to Patty Fletcher for coming in and telling us all about Port of Leith. We wish you all the best for the future, both in your distillery, your whiskey, and with your wee baby boy. That's it. Congratulations.
Thanks,
with the wee one, mate. That's fantastic news. That's amazing news.
Appreciate it.
So I'm going to raise a glass to both you, to you, your son, and to your distillery. To everyone at home, stay safe, stay at home. Sláinte, guys.
Marcus, it's been a pleasure. Do it again soon.